Each one of us has a favorite book that we would read several times over and not get bored with it. Thanks to that, a term table book has appeared in our language. There is a Ukrainian exclusive version of that, the so-called bootleg book. It originated from small format books of verses by Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. One could carry them in the bootleg and read them during leisure time. Nowadays, such books in Ukraine are republished as souvenirs or gifts. As time passes, tastes in literature might change, and no one's favorite book might be replaced by another. But the most important thing is that we're free to choose our favorite authors and read whatever we want. However, this has not always been the case. Totalitarian regimes have never encouraged the population to read. It was the state that decided which books are harmful, which are good and valuable. The notion of censorship, destruction of print runs, and persecution of authors has always flourished. But what was offered instead, you may ask? In order to satisfy the natural need of people to read books, the leaders not only promised, but forced their myths on people's minds, basically turning them into zombies for years, and sometimes for life. In 2 words, this can be called Operation Mindcrime. Adolf Hitler was one of the first dictators who tried this method with his book Mein Kampf. It is a mix of the Führer's autobiography and National Socialist ideas, which were brought to fruition during World War II. If the people of Germany had thought through them more thoroughly, perhaps the fate of their country could likely have been different. Before the elections in 1932, which brought Hitler to power, the sales of his book were pretty low, about 90,000 copies. By 1934, this number had reached 900,000 copies. The book was distributed for free, as obligatory literature, not only for party members, but even for newly married couples, instead of the Bible, starting from 1936. In Germany, the book was considered sacred. It was called different names, such as the main textbook on German Nazism or fascism, and the Book of a German. The so-called eternal copy of Hitler's book was made as follows. Calves of the best German breed were selected and skinned. The leather was processed on old-fashioned tools that were used in the 18th century. The craftsmen, whose ancestors had been checked over 10 generations, made an especially durable parchment of the rawhide leather. This book was handwritten by a team of artists in an officially approved script, using special ink and pens that was discussed in dozens of offices. Binders were made of manually smelted in special furnaces or that was mined in old-time German mines. Covers were made of stainless refractory steel. Then the title of the book was cut out and was reinforced by metal sheets. This book was made to last 1,000 years and it was preserved from any spoilage, fading and corrosion. The logic was that the Reich of Adolf Hitler, the Third Reich, was planned to last for 1,000 years. The book was put into a huge sarcophagus and preserved in a special mausoleum. Before World War II, Mein Kampf was translated into English, French and Russian. In the USSR, Mein Kampf was published in limited edition in 1933, especially for party officials to learn it inside out and practically memorize the words. Publication of this book in the USSR inspired another dictator to express his hidden thoughts. Indeed, Joseph Stalin also decided to write a book on what, in his opinion, was a pressing issue for each and every Soviet citizen. By 1938, Stalin had done away with basically all of his political opponents, and as a victor in the struggle for power, he wanted to create a new Bolshevik party history, in which he would have stood at the same level as Lenin, being one of the 2 great leaders of the Bolsheviks. Real documents and renowned scientists could have become an obstacle to the creation of a new myth. To neutralize the threat they posed, Stalin attacked the archive rats, as he used to call them, which were leafing through documents too fastidiously and scrupulously for his liking. He launched a campaign which involved a search for mistakes in books and articles on the All-Union Communist Party, as well as mutual accusations and confessions of the authors. Having cleared the operating table, Stalin started writing himself, and with the help of his closest associates, he created the history of the All-Union Communist Party, a short course. The book had become the nucleus of the all-communist ideological education system for many years. Journalists, scientists, writers, and party workers gave different titles of praise to this book. Its authors literally regularly competed in flattery and even had the audacity to call it an encyclopedia of Marxism. In March 1939, at the 11th Communist Party Congress, one Soviet ideologist, Andrei Zhdanov, said, "It must be said directly that over the period of existence of Marxism, this was the first Marxist book ever to be so widely disseminated. In fact, every year it was reprinted, and its total print run has exceeded an unprecedented 60 million copies." This book didn't outlive the last century. The last time it was published in 1953, its print run was a mere 10 million copies. During the 20th Communist Party Congress in February 1956, one of the members of the Stalin Communist Party Politburo, Anastas Mikoyan, said, "If our historians started to conduct a detailed study of historical and archived documents of our party, but not only of newspapers, as they could have made a better interpretation of events and facts given in the short course of party history from the perspective of Lenin." 50 years later, it was called the Bible of Stalinism. Today, it is known only to experts of history, having become a bibliographic rarity quite a long time ago. Popularity, simplicity, and understandable explanation of Stalin's short course did not give politicians of the next generations peace of mind. At a Politburo session held on March 10, 1966, Secretary-General of the Communist Party Leonid Brezhnev suggested writing a renewed history of a Communist Party, as good as short course. This is what he said: "The short course was a handbook not only of every communist, but also for every working man in our country." The short course of history of the Communist Party had really become a handbook of every Soviet citizen. Huge work on its creation and propaganda was conducted. An entire generation of Soviet people was raised on this handbook. At the same period of time, quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong, known in the Soviet Union as Mao Zedong's Citation Book, was being published in China. It consisted of citations from speeches and published works of Mao Zedong compiled according to topics. The print run of this West Pocket edition of this book, with a red cover, was one of the highest in the history of printed materials at over 1 billion copies. People in China were obliged to study Mao Zedong's citations at special courses during working hours, as the text was considered helpful to improve a person's work efficiency. In pictures and placards of that time, you can see hundreds of workers, besides Mao himself, holding the red-covered citation booklets in their hands. In the introduction of the book of the great leader, it was recommended to learn the citations by heart, keep learning them constantly, and use them in everyday speech. Fragments of Mao Zedong's works were ordered to be published in newspapers on a regular basis, so that all Chinese people would memorize them and use them on a daily basis. Allegedly, referring to the experience gained by the masses from studying and using extracts of the wise words of Master Mao Zedong, the authors of the introduction assured they would allow produce immediate and tangible results in the overall development of the country. As an example, Mao's citations inspired the working men of the Yunnan province to fight the flood of the Yangtze River. People with an open book in their hands and a citation from the chapter Revolutionary Heroism were pictured on a bas-relief. The quote goes as follows: "Do not fear sacrifices, go against all odds to achieve victory." In order to spread Maoism beyond China, the citations were translated into all the major European and Asian languages. In the West, the book of Mao Zedong's citations was known as the Red Book. Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi loved the color green, thus he called his theoretic work the Green Book. It was a collection of the Libyan leader's quotes, divided into 3 parts, which comprised such aspects of existence as issues of democracy, economic and social order. Just like in the previous cases, the leader of the regime meant to bring his ideas to the people. Therefore, the Green Book was present in every bookstore during Gaddafi's rule. Usually, several different language versions were available at once. The book taught about the basics of the so-called Third Universal Theory. It is a system created by Gaddafi himself. In it, the dictator criticized modern democracy in different ways, because in his opinion, it stopped being genuinely a notion that belonged to the people. The theory rejects all the traditional instruments of authority, such as parliaments, parties, referendums, and offers a concept of a direct democracy instead, which is based on People's Congress and People's Committees. Gaddafi tried to find a perfect form of social coexistence, which would include both social justice together with a compulsory unalterably strong authority. In March 1977, an attempt was made to implement Gaddafi's ideas in practice. The state was renamed into the Social People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. The word Jamahiriya meant state of the people. At the same time, Gaddafi remained the one and only dictator, and everybody knows what his experiments ended in. Mao Zedong's citation book had served as an example for Haitian dictator François Duvalier, who is known for creating a widespread system of prisons and concentration camps in the 1960s. The prison in the capital city of Port-au-Prince, where the president himself was in charge of torture and execution, was the most infamous of them all. The president's palace had its own torture chamber as well. In order to combat his political opponents and the population, Duvalier had created the so-called death squadrons, also known as the Tonton Macout. According to the dictator's orders, they had to kill 500 people daily. English writer Graham Greene described their crimes very well in his novel called The Comedians. Within the 14 years of Duvalier's rule, over 50,000 people had gone missing. In reality, they were murdered. Over 300,000 were forced to leave the country. Duvalier got rid of the unreliable people, and for those who did not oppose him, he wrote a book, Mao Zedong style, called The Thoughts of Duvalier. Each Haitian citizen was forced to buy the collection of Duvalier's speeches, priced at $15. The funds for buying the president's book were automatically allocated from people's salaries. Duvalier had been thinking about proclaiming himself Emperor of Haiti and setting up a monarchy. Therefore, the book of his thoughts opens with the phrase, "I am the flag of Haiti, one and indivisible." Then, suddenly, at the end of 2015, a new name in the list of dictators, who was a fanatic of political writing, appeared. Russian President Vladimir Putin joined Hitler, Stalin, Mao Zedong, Gaddafi and Duvalier when his administration published a book called Words That Changed the World, key quotes of Vladimir Putin. The book included 19 speeches and articles by the president in chronological order in the period from 2003 to 2014. Each chapter begins with the author's comments and the main quotes are highlighted with a different font. The introduction goes, "These are the words which define the changes in global politics." Putin is building something like North Korea. People have realized everything was fine, everything was going to pass, and published its citation book. There are compulsory portraits in kindergartens and elementary schools. There is a Putin's Avenue, only in Chechnya for now, but I believe that if the power doesn't change, something else will be definitely named after Putin. Citation books have appeared. The only thing left is to implement compulsory badges with the leader's face, just as in North Korea. Deputy head of the Russian presidential administration Vyacheslav Volodin not only ordered to make the book a table book version for Russian politicians, but also initiated the free distribution of the book among town and village heads throughout Russia. 400 pages of the edition include Putin's speeches and articles in chronological order. The book begins with his speech at the UN General Assembly in 2003 and ends with a similar speech at the same place and in the same tone, but made in 2015. Elimination of key institutions of international security is guaranteed to bring the world into chaos, said Putin at the UN over 10 years ago. In 2008, Russia occupied a part of Georgia, thus violating the main principle of security in Europe, namely inviolability of borders and territorial integrity of sovereign states. Putin had warned about chaos, and he was the one who created it. In his speech in Munich, Putin demanded the right for Russia to rule over the territory of the former Soviet Union and other regions as well. At the time, no one could have thought Putin was going to risk and violate international law by annexing Crimea and attacking the Ukrainian Donbas region. According to Volodin, the author of the idea to publish the book, Putin's book, Words That Changed the World, has proven the fact. Everything Putin says eventually comes true in one way or another. We studied his books and can confirm this idea. Putin's words are prophetic, Volodin says. In our opinion, Putin's consistency lies in the fact that he has no consistency. Phrases otherwise, he is consistently inconsistent. Given an interview to a German TV channel in 2008, Russian president stated, "Crimea is not a disputed territory. Russia has long recognized the borders of present-day Ukraine." And here is a fragment of his speech before the Federal Assembly of Russia. "Crimea is our common attainment. This strategic territory should be part of the inviolable and strong sovereignty, which in fact can be only Russian." This is indeed a remarkable, yet preposterous consistency. What will Putin say about Crimea tomorrow? He probably doesn't know himself. What is the purpose of filling the heads of Russian people with provocative and absurd Putin's quotes? According to Volodin, the officials have to realize what the president wants and where the state is going. But all the Russian president wants is war, in any form and on any scale, so that he can shift the blame for the people's poverty to this war. Where is the Russian state headed? Never ask the Russian for whom the bell tolls. They are busy learning Putin's quotes. In today's Russia, Putin is everywhere. On TV, on billboards, on icons, on paintings and on calendars. First they will hang Putin, and then they will learn his quotes. The president's ill-wishers joke. "Putin is our everything," swears a crowd of Russian patriots in patriotic frenzy. If there is nothing, then only Putin remains. Words that change the world. Key quotes of Vladimir Putin. This is the full name of the Russian president's book. Words that ruin the world. This is the correct way to read the title of the collection of Vladimir Putin's speeches and articles. Looking back at history, one can confidently say the fate of all authoritarian regimes and dictatorships is the same. Sooner or later, dictators are overthrown, and their books, once considered invaluable, become nothing more than wasted paper. Unfortunately, Russia is in for yet another tragedy.